All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. I'm Jennifer Sheridan, the Family Services Coordinator here at the Coleman Center in Petal, Mississippi, and this is the fall book review of The Whole Brain Child by Daniel Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson. This is a really excellent book. I found this book from some coworkers, probably many years ago, when I was working in the adoption world, working with kids who had been adopted, working with families who were interested in bringing children into their home, who came from hard places, who came just from situations that were not ideal for them. And so this book was one of the first books I ever read about the brain, one of the first books I ever read that talked about parenting in a different way. And so that is definitely why I chose this as our first book. So I'm going to open up my chat box and keep a look on that. So if you have any questions or have any comments, feel free to put those in the chat box, and we will just get rolling into it. So we start off with just a great introduction by Daniel and Tina as they really talk about survival and they talk about thriving, which if we're parents, if you're probably watching, if you're watching this, likely you are a parent or you're an intern that's being forced to watch this as part of their internship. But if you're participating in this and you've read this book, likely you are a parent and you have wondered, why are some of the techniques that maybe my parents used when I was a child, why are they not working with my children? And maybe why are the techniques that my friends use, that I see them use and see them sort of being effective with their kids, why doesn't that work with my kids? And I would say a lot of times we slip into survival mode as parents, and we're not interested in thriving because at the moment we're just trying to make it to the next moment. We are just trying to make it through the next 5 minutes or until bedtime, and we're relieved of maybe some tension that's going on in the house. And so I love that they started out talking about really turning survival moments into opportunities to thrive with our kids. I love this quote on page 12 of the introduction that says, as parents become more aware and emotionally healthy, their children reap the rewards and move towards health as well. And I think that's key for us as we look at this book, as we look at how these elements really will apply to our lives, really seeing that we are responsible ourselves to become more emotionally aware and healthy within ourselves, because that's really the first step. We can't lead a person to health if we ourselves are not healthy. And so I think that's another thing that I'll bring up at the end of chapter 2 that they talk about at the end. It's kind of a little synopsis or excerpt. So let's jump on into chapter 1, and that is parenting with the brain in mind. Now, integration, it really is all about coordinating and balancing these two separate regions of our brains, these hemispheres of our brains, that do not, our children are not born with this automatically being linked together. This is a development over time. And so what molds this brain of ours, what molds the brain of our children is experience. So if experience includes trauma, early hospitalization, it includes just the experiences of any kind of abuse, neglect, any kind of trauma, whether it was through an accident, maybe an early car accident, or just stress prenatally. We see that all of these experiences are starting to mold the brains of our children. And so if we are wanting to correct those experiences, if we are wanting to mold those experiences to be seen as something different, then we have got to give our kids new experiences. We've got to give them something different than what has been part of their story in the past. And so the story of Marianne and Marco, I don't know if you remember that one in chapter 1. Marco is in a car accident with his babysitter. And Marco is very young at this stage. He cannot fully explain, he cannot fully tell what has happened. But what his mom does after she gets to the scene, and he's obviously very upset, she gets to the scene, she calms him down. But it's what she does later on that really impacts him in such a healthy way, because she helps to tell the story. She helps Marco tell the story of this accident and what's going on. And this is very, I mean, this can be done if your child is verbal, if your child is definitely older. This is a much easier task, right? Because our kids sometimes become natural storytellers. But for Marco, he is so young. He is barely able to get out the words for Sophia, his babysitter, and he says woo woo for the ambulance that came and picked her up, which seemed to be the most distressing part of his experience. And so the doctors tell us the story of Marianne and tell us that she goes in and she helps to craft the story for him and gives him the place to say what he experienced, to say what he's done. And while this may seem counterintuitive, it may seem like, are we re-traumatizing by talking about the trauma, by talking about this hard experience? Am I leading them into feeling more despair? We actually are learning, and the authors are explaining to us, this is actually not the case. We are not re-traumatizing our children by talking about this experience. We are helping them to organize parts of their brain that have experienced this trauma, that have experienced this negative circumstance, and then we help them to integrate both sides of their brain emotionally and logically in order that they can make sense. Because oftentimes when we're in something like an accident that Marco experienced, we have all of these big emotions on the right side of our brain, and we feel all these feelings, but we have not yet organized it because our right side of our brain is all about those emotions and big feelings. But we need the integration of our left side of our brain in order to help make sense of that. Daniel Siegel talks about the river of well-being. That's really in all of us. So as we're coming down this river, we are experiencing calmness, we're experiencing peace. We have two banks on either side, and I think we kind of gravitate more easily from one to another. So we have the bank of chaos on one side, and it's wild on the bank of chaos. You know, we cannot make sense of anything. There are no rules. Everything is just wild and out. But then on the other side, we've got the bank of rigidity. And this is where we have no grace, no mercy, because everything is very black and white. We are following a set of rules on this bank. And so what this does is when we are floating down the river of well-being and we're in the middle, we have a good balance, chaos and rigidity. Then we can see that we are able to be creative. We are able to have experiences, both good and bad, whatever we want to call good and bad, both negative and positive. And we're able to cope with all of those different experiences in a really healthy way. I just was talking to my son who's back there painting while we talked today, but we were just talking about resilience. And I think resilience is found in this balance of chaos and rigidity. And if we can't find that, we're going to be less resilient, because if we get stuck in the bank of rigidity, we can't keep moving forward, and we are not able to access emotions in a healthy way. But if we are all emotions, we are all right brain, stuck in the chaos of life, and we know that life is throwing at us all sorts of things that we can have big feelings about, then we're not able to build that resiliency and keep us navigating down the center of this river. So I think it's a really beautiful analogy for us to take a look at and to kind of keep referring back to say like, okay, if my child is in a boat right now, where are they? Are they in the middle of this river of well-being? Are they stuck in rigidity? Are they not able to get past, why they had ice cream yesterday, but they can't have ice cream today? Or do they not understand, maybe why we had a late bedtime yesterday because it was the weekend, but now it's a school night, so we need to have an earlier bedtime, and they're kind of stuck in this chaotic experience. What we're going to learn through this book is how to integrate both of these for the well-being of our children, and I would say for our well-being as parents, because when our children are going down the middle of the river of well-being, we too are able to seek a better balance in our life as well, which is just as difficult, especially if we have experienced traumas or hardships and really just the stressors of being parents and adults in an ever-changing world. So everyday moments really can influence how well our kids' brains are growing towards integration. And we can do this through offering opportunities to really exercise this and really helping to facilitate integration because we want these parts of the brain to be better connected. The corpus callosum is that piece that's in the middle of our two hemispheres that really help to connect. And so as we are doing this, we are really pumping up not just integration, but really whole body well-being. We know that the brain really, we talked about in the parent education webinar earlier this week, how the brain really impacts really whole body systems. Our heart races, our adrenaline's pumping, whether dopamine is dropped or serotonin is dropped in our bodies. All of these things are so interconnected. So if we are able to help integrate these two sides of our brains, we're doing a much better job of creating a holistic approach to caring for our children instead of just saying, I'm going to make sure they make A's and then their brain is developed. I'm going to make sure that they play baseball so their body is getting exercise. And all of these things are also separate. I'm going to make sure they go to church so they get a spiritual development. But really, if we are parenting with the brain in mind, we are parenting in a holistic approach where everything is an opportunity to help integrate the brain. So that's really chapter 1. Let me just double check we don't have any comments or questions in the chat box. So let's take a look at chapter 2. And if you have any comments or questions, you can put them in the chat box if you don't want to say them out loud. Or you can click open your microphone and let me hear from you guys. One quote that I did find in the introduction that I forgot to read to you guys because I thought this was a really great quote because I feel like I experienced this in my home. But this said, instead of just breaking up the fight and sending the sparring siblings to different rooms, you can use the argument as an opportunity for teaching about reflective listening and hearing another person's point of view, about clearly and respectfully communicating your own desires, about compromise, sacrifice, negotiation, and forgiveness. These are all elements that we can take, maybe when siblings are fighting, instead of screaming, everybody go to your room, which is exactly what has come out of my mouth before, and saying, okay, how can I use this as a way to teach how we interact with others in an appropriate and healthy way? Now, this is the ideal situation. So on page 9 of the introduction, that's where you can find this quote in the second paragraph. So check that out. This is the ideal. Are we going to do this every time? We're just absolutely not. We're not. Parents cannot be perfect, just like our kiddos are not perfect. We know that. And oftentimes we've got to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, you're never going to be perfect, but you can just try your best. And so I would say trying some of these elements next time your kiddos are in a fight. And instead of saying, everybody go to your room, say, okay, I'm going to stop and we are going to try to work on one element. All right, so let's take a look back to Marco. Also, I wanted to share this from page 9. I thought was really helpful. So when we were talking about Marianne helping Marco retell that story in order to help integrate both sides of his brains, this is what she did. She diffused the scary and traumatic emotions in his right brain so that they didn't rule him. She did so by bringing in factual details and logic from his left brain, which at 2 years old is just beginning to develop, so that he could deal with the accident in a way that made sense to him. And isn't that what we want to do with all of our kids, is really just help them to be able to make sense of the crazy world that they're living in and all of these weird new experiences that they're having. So whether it's a positive experience or a negative experience, I want them to have some reasoning behind all of these crazy emotions. And when they're so logical and trapped in this left brain, I want them to be able to draw on their emotions and be vulnerable. Because for some of our kiddos who are super left brain oriented, maybe you're really left brain oriented out there, when we get trapped into this really logical, literal side, we oftentimes protect the right side because we don't want to show those emotions. We don't want to be vulnerable to give those out because we don't feel safe. And so what we want to do is create that safety, that felt safety in the world of our children at different times, all throughout their life, all throughout the day, so that they can share all parts of themselves. So let's chat about chapter 2. So chapter 2 is all about integrating this left and right brain. Now, what I love about this book is really does give some practical tips. It'll kind of go through a synopsis, go through organizing some information, and then it goes into what you can do at home. And I would say of all of these strategies, you've got to really, you've got to manipulate these in order that they fit your family, because it may look a little different from my family as it might to your family or this family over here. And so that's definitely what we need to take into consideration when we see those. And don't say, we've got to follow these. We're gonna use both sides of our brain. We're gonna say, I really like this. This is super literal. It says very ordered and logical, but also I'm gonna have to flex and consider the audience that I'm parenting. And so we're gonna have to integrate both sides of our brain to implement this in our house. So let's look at utilizing our left brain and our right brain helps bring about clarity and understanding. And I don't know if you've ever gotten into an argument with a young child. There's often not a lot of clarity going on. They are seeing the world in one way. We are seeing the world in a completely different way. And oftentimes when we get into these power struggles, clarity gets thrown out of the window. They stop trying to understand us. We stop trying to understand them. We just want them to comply with what we have said. They just want to make us say something different and maybe comply to what they're trying to get. And so this is oftentimes when we see parents and children not able to communicate because we're coming at it oftentimes from two different sides of our brain. So if our kiddo is tantruming, melting down, we are so upset, we're sobbing, we're crying, or maybe we're raging even, oftentimes they're stuck in that right brain because it's all emotion. It's no logic, nothing logical or reasonable is coming about because it's all emotion. And then we walk in all logical and not recognizing emotion, not recognizing maybe how out of sorts they are and saying, well, that really, I don't understand why you're crying. Like, that's not something we need to cry about. And so then we're at odds with each other. And so if we are going to connect with our children, truly connect with them, we have got to meet our right brain to their right brain. And our left brain comes in after. And so we know left brain is logical. It's all about order and being very literal. And then our right brain is all about emotion, nonverbal cues, facial expressions, even posture, everything that you just have to sense from people. This is utilizing our right brain. And kiddos really don't start developing this until after 3. And so this really comes into play after 3, and that's when they start the question of why. They say, why? What? Why? Why are we going? Why are we getting in the car? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? Why are we buying this? And on and on and on. It's like, please don't ask me why anymore. Well, they're just trying to utilize all parts of their brains to really bring about more understanding of their life. And so I think I said that backwards. They're all about the right brain, emotion, and then the literal comes in when they start asking why at age 3. I think I said that backwards. So this is why we have epic meltdowns during the, the age of 2. And maybe on into 3. I've heard some parents say the terrible 3s. We didn't have terrible 2s, we had terrible 3s. But it's because all of these emotional states are really just enhanced, and we've not yet understood how do we organize these things with our left brain. And so here's a couple of things that you can do as parents. One thing that we can do is connect and then redirect. Now, this is very hard. And if you were parented like I was parented, this wasn't necessarily how things were done. Nobody was trying to connect with me before they were correcting me. But what we can do is try to match our right brain to our kiddo's right brain. So if they are upset, we've, thrown our homework on the floor. They say, well, I'm not doing this. What we can do is connect our right brain by saying what we feel like they are saying. So we say, you seem very frustrated, and I would be so frustrated too if I had to do this homework. Because wouldn't we? Most of us would. Like, most of us can empathize and understand if we stop and don't try to correct behavior in the beginning, but we really try to see why our kiddo might be feeling this way. If homework is really hard for them, homework would be super frustrating, and it would be exhausting, and maybe it's the end of the day and I'm just done. And as an adult, when I start feeling that way, I get to say, I'm done. I take everything off my schedule. I stop making plans. I cancel plans because I'm an adult and I get to do that. I get to make those decisions. But our kiddo does not have that kind of power. So if we can use our right brain to connect with them emotionally, then we can bring in some left brain lessons and help bring about some discipline and order. And we know discipline is not about punishment. Discipline is about teaching. It's the same word we use, roots we use for disciple, and that it really is to teach. So we're going to then bring in that left brain in order to teach them what is a better way to get our needs met. And so connect and redirect. Now, Daniel Hughes, who is a family therapist, really fantastic writer and teacher when he talks about attachment. And he uses PACE as an acronym for how do we interact. And that's through playfulness, through acceptance, through curiosity, and through empathy. And I think all of those things provide that groundwork for connecting emotionally with our right brains. And then bringing in that left brain and taking in lessons, this may take a while. This may not be right after everybody's calmed down and then we go into a lesson, because we might easily be amped back up. This may be the next day when we really call back that behavior and say, remember when you were so upset yesterday? Okay, I wanted us to just talk about that and talk about some ways, some different ways we can handle that. Is there a different way we can do homework? Could we break up homework and do 10 minutes right when you get home and then 10 minutes later? And so there's a lot of different ways that we can do this. And our kiddos, we're going to have to just be really aware about how each of our kiddos responds to this sort of correction and discipline. There were definitely some great examples in chapter 2. If you have a really literal left brain child who does not take criticism or correction well. So the second thing that Daniel and Tina teach us is name it to tame it. And that really is when the right brain emotions are raging. And we have all seen this. If you've been around kids in Walmart at 9:30 at night, you've seen the rage come And what we do is we ask kids to tell a story about what's upsetting them. Now, narrative writing is so important, and narratives help us to organize crazy experiences into some semblance of logical progression. And so it's why writing things in a journal, it's why even writing stories or writing, maybe like a comic strip of what happened helps us to feel more in control of our emotions. And then I think one of our biggest things that we can do is on page 36, there's a little gray box in your book, and it's all about being aware of our own styles. Are we kind of leaning to the left? Are we kind of literal and logical? Or do we lean to the right and we're kind of emotional, we're kind of run. We don't necessarily run on a schedule or routine, and we're not really black and white thinkers. Do we lean one way to the other? I think it's so important, because if we have a child that is opposite of that, we're going to really have to work hard. We're going to have to dig in deep in order that we can meet them where they are and mirror whatever stage that they're in. So if they're stuck in this right brain, which is really when kids have these out of control behaviors, or behaviors we feel like are out of control, it's usually when they're stuck in that right brain and we want them to get to the left. And if we come at it from left, because that's just where we are, and we're here, we're super logical, and this is just the way it is, but the rule, this has been the rule for 10 years, and how dare you jump on the couch? We don't jump on the couch. And we never meet them on that right side. We can lose so much opportunity to connect. So we've got to first be aware of ourselves. And I think these are two great chapters to get us started as we move on to chapter 3 next week. And so next week is all about building the staircase of our mind. This is something that I talk about a lot in the therapy office and with parents and with teachers and anybody who will sit around and listen to me. And this is all about integrating vertically. So we've talked about integrating horizontally, these two hemispheres of our brain. And so next week, we're going to talk about integrating vertically. Maybe my little partner back there won't be here next week since he had the afternoon off after a doctor's appointment. But I will be here next week to talk about chapter 3. Please bring your questions, bring your comments, your favorite quotes from the book. And I look forward to being with you guys next week. All right, I'll see you then.